We cannot buy ourselves a sustainable lifestyle. That is not how it works. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today is part 2 of me reacting to your sustainability hot takes and unpopular opinions. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for the feedback on the last video. This is part 2. If you haven't watched part 1, I will leave it down below so you can go and check that out right away. I asked you guys on Instagram for your sustainability hot takes and you guys did not disappoint. Let's get into it. Number 1, plastic is often ignored as a big problem. I disagree. Not that plastic is a big problem, but that it's often ignored. From my perspective, I actually feel like plastic is focused a lot on when it comes to sustainability, and what we often tend to forget is all the impact that we cannot see. Some of the campaigns for less plastic in our oceans, like ocean cleanup schemes as well. There's so many different types of campaigns and innovations related to plastic waste. So I definitely don't think it is one of those big ignored issues. Overall, there's a lot of sustainability issues that's being ignored, and to some extent all of them are. But I definitely feel like it's one of those things that where many consumers know about plastic pollution. So recycling items is good even if it fails, because it makes you rethink waste, you're being creative, you learn skills. Absolutely, if you want to upcycle something rather than recycle it or throw it away, be my guest, and I think it's super interesting to see how we can use things multiple times rather than just throwing it away or throwing it away to recycling. Recycling also isn't a 100% guarantee for something to actually be repurposed and reused, and many times when we recycle something, we're material recycling, so we will turn one thing into another thing and use that material. But if you can use that thing in the form it is now, do that, absolutely, and learn and be creative, and I think that is super cool. Ooh. Renewable energy without scaling down our collective energy consumption won't do. Overall, in the grand scheme of things, I think a lot of our sustainability problems would be solved if we scale down on consumption, usage, etc., and that also includes energy. Absolutely. Most efforts by people and corporations are performative. Yes and no. Okay, so what I'm thinking here is that it doesn't really matter if something starts out as being performative. That is the way most people learn new things or dabble in new territory or like try out new lifestyles. I think it's very important to separate how we talk about people's sustainability and how we talk about corporations' sustainability, because those two are vastly different sizes and they can do different things and the impacts are different, etc. So if people, consumers, are doing performative sustainability actions, I don't honestly see the problem in that. We have to keep learning and educating, etc., talking about it and expanding our horizons. But most people, when they start out wanting to do sustainability, wanting to do zero waste, veganism, low waste, minimalism, etc., so many different variations of this, it starts out as being performative. It did as well for me. So I don't necessarily see that as a problem. I see it as a bigger problem when companies are doing performative sustainability, because that means that they're doing the exact same shit behind the scenes, and we don't want that to happen. So I don't think those two are the same statement. I don't think the consequences of those two statements are similar. So yes and no. Milk to plant milk, I disagree with this because they're not neutrally comparable. I don't agree with the fact that you can't substitute milk for plant milk, first of all. But I do agree that they aren't necessarily nutritionally comparable, but I also don't know who says that they are. So when you go vegan, when you substitute meat and dairy for plants, you also need to be aware of how you get your nutrients. It's a really good idea to stop drinking dairy because there are a lot of other stuff in dairy that we don't necessarily want. The industry is also really bad. But when you go vegan, I hope no one thinks that they can just substitute one thing for another and it's going to be the same. So the things that you're now out getting from dairy, you will have to get from other places. I hope that feels like a very natural development when changing your diet. At least it should be. And if you haven't thought about that until now, ayo, look at that. I still think it is absolutely fine to ditch dairy and start drinking plant milk instead, but obviously when you change your diet, no matter in what direction or to what or from what, you have to be aware of nutrients and get the proper nutrients. Alrighty. Most restaurants aren't sustainable and exploit their workers. So yes and no. Most restaurants have tremendous amounts of food waste and generate a lot of waste because they're restaurants. I was in Helsinki in 2021 where I went to my first experience with a zero waste restaurant, which was really cool, but that is by far not the norm. Overall, the restaurant industry is really unsustainable, and in many places and in many cases they also do indeed exploit their workers. I also think that it's different for different countries. So for instance, in Denmark, the minimum wage for servers and restaurant workers are much higher than I see, for instance, in the US. For instance, in Denmark, we don't tip. It's not normal to tip because people's normal salaries are enough, so no one is living off of tips. That entire system of waiters and servers being dependent on tips from customers is absolutely unsustainable. It's absolutely exploitive and unethical. So yes, if that is the current system you live in, absolutely exploitive, and not necessarily like that everywhere in the world, but there's definitely sprinkles of it. It is more expensive to buy sustainable products than unsustainable ones. Yes and no again. So overall, I don't necessarily think it's more expensive to be sustainable. But if the idea that is marketed to you is that you need to buy all these things to be sustainable, obviously it's going to be more expensive. You don't need all the things that are marketed towards you whatsoever. If the sustainability ideal or goal that you see in your head is you running around with 3 different clean canteens, you have your stainless steel lunchbox, you have all these swaps and they're the most expensive version of that swap, and that is sustainability. And if it's only buying really expensive meat substitutes from really expensive brands, and only buying really expensive clothing from really ethical clothing companies, obviously that is a more expensive lifestyle overall. But so much of sustainable living is about not buying things, about using what you already have, about thrifting certain items and finding things. So I think that is a really important part of sustainable living. We cannot buy ourselves a sustainable lifestyle. That is not how it works. Sometimes there's a swap that you might need to purchase that will make your life easier, but overall the sustainable lifestyle switch happens outside of consumption. And that's just really important to remember, especially when another truth is advertised constantly, that you need all of these things to be more sustainable. However, many sustainable items are more expensive because people are paid actual livable wages to produce them, and it costs more to be considerate of the planet. It costs more to incorporate all these different initiatives that make a product or a production line or supply chain more sustainable. And that, as consumers, is something that we have grown accustomed to not paying for. Without nuclear energy, renewables are not going to meet the energy needs of the population. Okay, I don't agree with this, but I do agree with the fact that we need something else in many places other than renewable energy, because some renewable energy types are inconsistent and change with the weather. It's not always windy, it's not always sunny. There's some places that rely on hydropower, and that is a much more consistent renewable energy because water usually runs all the time and is always in movement. However, it doesn't make sense to make new nuclear power facilities now. They take a really long time to build and to create. I made an entire video about the nuclear energy question because I do definitely think it requires more explanation that I can give in like this tiny bit. I don't think that is a one-size-fits-all. Not every country should rely on nuclear energy. We also still have the notion of the waste that comes from nuclear energy that we don't really have a plan for. That's also something we should concern ourselves with. But overall, there is an issue with the unreliant renewable energy source that cannot sustain the demand for energy for the entire population. No, that is true. Poor people are sustainability experts. They are, though, just as I talked about in the other one with the expensive and non-expensive and sustainable and non-sustainable product. Poor people know so many things about being sustainable, because sustainability was not something that just magically happened a couple of years ago when we began looking at pretty aesthetically pleasing zero waste pantries on Instagram. Those practices that are like the root, the foundation of the sustainability movement have been tended to by generations after generations of people affected by poverty and indigenous communities and marginalized communities. All of these things that we are now talking about and that a lot of consumers, especially in the West, are starting to talk about, start to practice, have been practiced for generations and generations. So absolutely, yeah, poor people are absolutely sustainability experts. Doing a little bit over and over again helps more than doing one big thing one time. I definitely think this can be true. Obviously, it depends a lot on what is meant by small things and what are meant by big things, you know? But overall, definitely, yeah, I think we should strive towards making changes that we can sustain throughout our lives and not something that we can only do once and then never do again, because that's not really how change is made. Then there was a lot of different entries that I don't know if they are hot takes, but I definitely want to talk about it as well because I saw several entries about this. It is this product that I have at home that doesn't have the sustainability aesthetic is more sustainable than going out and buying a new product. And that is absolutely true. I saw it, for instance, with plastic bags, Tupperware, etc. Yeah, using what you have, even if it doesn't fall into the sustainability aesthetic, is obviously better than going out and getting more stuff and creating demand for more products to be made when there's no need to. And lastly, and I'm a little bit excited about this and also really want to hear your guys' opinion on this, but electric cars are a greenwashed hoax. Overall, I don't agree with this, but I definitely see where this person is coming from. So from my perspective, when you call something a hoax, it implies that there was an intention to mislead people. And I don't think there is an intention to mislead people with electric cars. I think electric cars was a very natural next step when looking at sustainability and transportation, because so many systems and so many cities are built from the perspective of we need cars to be here. I know, for instance, in Denmark, we have, compared to other places, amazing public transportation opportunities. So I would always tell people, you know, use public transportation. But a while ago, I learned more about how public transportation works in other places in the world. And for instance, how the US is tailored and designed so much for cars. I think it is a very natural solution to something without having to change the entire system. It's easier to change the product than it is to change the system the product goes into, and that is overall in itself an issue. I wouldn't shame anyone for getting an electric car if that is the next step for them. Some people are dependent on being able to transport themselves, so I wouldn't shame anyone for buying an electric car, but I would also always advocate for public transportation, for transportation opportunities that doesn't involve individual entities, for individual consumers. Always. And with that being said, that was it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I would love to hear you guys' hot takes and also your reactions to these opinions that I have shared now. Also, you would help a girl out if you liked up this video and subscribe to my channel. That would be so amazing. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day and I will see you guys next time. Take really good care of yourselves. Until then, bye. Thank you so much for watching this video, and also a special thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys help me create green zero waste content and I love you guys. You can find the links to my social media accounts down below and the link to my Patreon on this screen. Bye!